One of the quiet recalibrations now silently reshaping the balance at Fairmont Crest comes from a name everyone assumed had grown weary after a string of scandal-laced clashes: Leslie. After being humiliated on the Dupree doorstep, she did not vanish from the power map as many had hoped. Instead, she stepped back to study how the gated community's tightly sealed ecosystem operates, reading each clause of the bylaws, measuring every camera's blind spot, noting the security team's shift patterns and the visiting schedules of Anita, Vernon, Danny, and Bill. From there, Leslie redefined her objective. No longer chasing noisy provocations for attention, she crafted a strategy of soft infiltration, in which purchasing a condominium along the outer ring of Fairmont Crest would serve both as a legitimate residency ticket and as a springboard for psychological interference, pressing into the Dupree family's existing hairline fractures. She worked with Vanessa in Uptown to assemble a financial narrative as spotless as glass, tapped a few legal advisors who had quietly serviced stealth acquisitions, and let slip into the ears of brokers a carefully aerated rumor that a well-bred, courteous buyer who contributes to community funds was searching not for show but for a place to settle in for the long haul. The mortgage files, asset attestations, and homeowner association pledges were standardized to the point of near impersonality, as if all Leslie wanted was a roof, when what she sought was a lawful gate that opened straight into the heart of a neighborhood the Duprees had long believed was an unbreachable home field. From the moment she put down a good faith deposit, Leslie adjusted her movements around Fairmont Crest. No more impulsive struts down the boulevard in gossip magnet dresses. She chose peak hours to appear at the edge of the plaza, a folder and phone in hand like any resident busy with work, offering the security guards an unremarkable smile, flashing a guest pass at each gate, pausing at the Lakeside Cafe to read the community bulletin and feign a mild debate with staff about overnight parking rules. These small, steady, monotonously similar motions turned her into a familiar, harmless silhouette, an illusion of safety places like Fairmont Crest often invent to soothe the strictness of their own regulations. As the condo application entered its final review, Leslie layered in one more distraction by performing an almost excessive interest in community life, emails about the Green Space Fund, nighttime lighting, and plans to refurbish the playground, as if she had long loved Fairmont Crest and merely wished to pitch in. Each message was quietly CC'd to a handful of prominent residents on the mailing list, including a few friendly to the Duprees. To create the impression that Leslie already pulsed with this place's rhythm even before she had a key. The most important adjustment, however, lay not in procedure but in how she positioned her presence as a mirror set before the Dupree home. She knew Anita was proud yet exhausted by the role of pillar, that Vernon guarded face while avoiding exposure of a power vacuum, that Danny bruised easily when her daughter was shaken, and that Bill was the only one willing to get his hands dirty to keep order without asking for praise. Leslie did not need to kick in a door, she chose to slip into the gaps between these people, touching each scratch and pressing just enough to make the household hear the rasp without locating its source. Being summarily dumped off the Dupree stoop by Bill only honed her strategy. Hoisted then dropped outside the gate, she absorbed the not welcome message. Instead of reacting, she allowed the humiliation to freeze, compressing into a thin sheet of ice laid over a boiling heart. That fragile glaze gave her poise in meetings with the bank, the HOA board, the financial auditors, and in every courteous nod toward watchful, suspicious eyes. She even recalibrated her social media: no spats, no coy insinuations, only the occasional sunrise on the city's fringe, captioned with thoughts on the quiet a grown person needs to reset a breath. That silence became a thin veil of smoke over the real work, reading security reports, tracing localized outages that coincided with gate system upgrades, learning the names of overnight guards, even memorizing small motifs on the mossy wall behind the maintenance warehouse to map sightlines least likely to be noticed. She no longer wanted to burst into the living room, she wanted to become a resident, papers in order, before the Duprees could redefine Leslie in the old way. This adjustment came with a new complication sparked by her ambition to wrench the family narrative's steering wheel. Leslie intended to use the condo purchase itself to stir the pot, to turn the contract into a psychological lever that would force the Duprees to see her daily, hear her name in HOA meetings, spot her comment letters on the notice board, and argue with neighbors over a proposal seemingly tiny but deliberately primed by her to detonate. With every thin cord tightened one more notch, she waited for the faint crackle of paint splitting on a wall. Only when the fissure ran long enough would she lay a fingertip along it. Bill saw through the smoke and skipped the performance of goodwill. The reflex of a man long cast as the fixer pushed him toward the clean option: remove Leslie from the house before she could cede the rug. On the surface, the act restored bright lines: inside versus outside, family versus disruptor, order versus chaos. At a deeper level, it inadvertently handed Leslie what she lacked: a searing motive to legitimize each next step as self-defense after an insult. The question ceased to be whether she would return, it became how, and who would serve as the most convenient launchpad for a rage-cool to clarity. Chelsea's name entered the calculus not because she had done wrong, but because she sits at the intersection of many psychological lines: daughter to Danny and Bill, a face the community recognizes, a young woman fresh from a trauma large enough to scatter the protective ring around her, someone whose family's every tension reflects most clearly upon her. In Leslie's manipulation diagram, she did not need to touch Chelsea directly, she only needed to nudge a few pebbles so the current bent off course, fostering the misperception that Chelsea's unease partly flowed from Leslie's turbulence, and then let confusion self-replicate. She began by letting out ambiguous signals that she would soon be an official resident, setting the neighborhood chat groups abuzz. The cautious conservatives clamored to tighten visitor rules, the pragmatists proposed deeper scrutiny of the newcomers' funds, the tolerant urged a second chance. Each seemingly harmless axis of debate, set beside the fragile mood of Danny and her daughter after the upheaval, became a low structural rumble that turned family dinners into emergency meetings and colored mundane questions like whether today's mail had arrived with an interrogative edge. Leslie never said Chelsea's name, yet she deftly raised the query of how someone who once stirred tensions could live steps from a victim, and whether that was fair to those who needed quiet to heal. The question did not name a culprit, but it selected, by default, a victim, the piece Chelsea was struggling to piece back together. When the HOA received Leslie's file, Bill returned to the battlefield of paperwork. He attacked the rules, not her private life, combing through safety of residency provisions, citing precedents from years past when a destabilizing resident was asked to undergo counseling before approval, hunting for the tiny comma in the text that allowed review periods to stretch indefinitely if the community required extra assurance. He rang former partners to verify the financial letters in Leslie's packet and persuaded a few neighborhood heavyweights that slowing down was not inhumane but a sign of collective care. Leslie, however, had anticipated the interception. She enclosed a pledge to contribute to the security fund, to sponsor camera upgrades in low-traffic zones, even to host a safety skills workshop for young residents. The offer neatly met practical needs and conjured the illusion of restitution that she recognized herself as a past source of friction and was proactively converting it. The thicker that illusion grew, the easier it became to recast Bill's moral high ground as personal bias. In that gray zone, Leslie deliberately drew Chelsea's name across like a shadow. She did not accuse or speculate, only exuded a suffocating suggestion that her presence was a stress test of the Dupree's protective power, that if they were strong enough no one could touch Chelsea whether she lived next door or across town. For a father like Bill, the test was a straight jab at pride. He understood that if Leslie moved in, every beat of Chelsea's heart would be besieged by imagination, and that if he barred Leslie at any cost, he might turn her into a martyr of unfair treatment, fuel for her next play. On that knife's edge, Danny became the factor he could not ignore. A mother's heart wanted to bolt every door against ill winds, but a woman's reason knew fear could not be a long-term foundation for decision-making. Danny looked at her home, at Bill, at Chelsea, and recognized the dispiriting truth: Leslie did not need to do much, she only needed to exist in the right spot to kick up waves. The only antidote would be to rebuild internal trust until outside surf could not reach the living room. But rebuilding trust takes time, while Leslie was counting days until a condo key glittered in her palm. Thus Leslie's recalibration ceased being merely personal, it became a mirror exposing the defensive architecture of both the Duprees and Fairmont Crest itself. Are the rules here designed to protect people from risk, or to entrench the power of a few families? Does someone who once caused trouble get a transparent path to start over, or a permanent red mark? Can a young woman like Chelsea heal in the eye of the rumor storm, or will her relatives' anxieties turn her recovery into a gilded cage? In this position, Bill remains the fixer, but he cannot rely on screws and glue alone. He needs a fresh layer of humility to tell true order from the mirage fear paints. As for Leslie, if she truly lets her anger pour onto Chelsea, whether directly or through the levers of public opinion, she will reveal that every pledge to contribute was only a wrapper for a need to control. Yet another possibility is colder and subtler: she never touches Chelsea at all, only the way people see her, until each step the girl takes out the door sounds like a neighbor's sigh. And perhaps in the instant the entire community falls abruptly silent at that silhouette, Leslie finally claims the power she has coveted since the day she set foot in Fairmont Crest, not the right to reside, but the right to make others adjust their stride because of her. In that open-ended finale, Leslie's adjustment seeds a variable more enduring than any noisy break-in. It turns every small decision inside the Dupree home into a test of trust and grit. If Bill cannot find a way to protect Chelsea with calm, steady resolve rather than urgent suppression, Leslie's cold rage will keep seeping into each hairline crack, leaving the house, doors closed and deadbolts latched, never quite as quiet as it was before. At the very instant the lights exploded across the glass atrium and the ceiling-hung screens began a synchronized countdown to the launch of the new collection, Chelsea Hamilton took the hit like a lightning bolt rending the sky, sound warped, signals burst into splashes of white static, and darkness swallowed the backstage whole. When she opened her eyes, the thin veil of powder had dried into a mask, her wrists burned against the cold, rigid bite of a cuff, and the smell of metal and disinfectant fused with a dense, clotted silence, the kind that lives only in rooms never meant for people to linger. The final fragments before she blacked out still murmured. The stage director shouting through the headset, shoes pounding the floor, a door sliding shut, and then, emptiness. Chelsea cried out, her voice hoarse with panic. Each plea leapt up and was hurled back by a dead flat wall into a rough echo, as if this space had been engineered to break the wool before it ever touched the skin. At Fairmont Crest, where everything is usually trimmed to proportion, that cry reached no one, but it did appear on a phone, Leslie Thomas's, like a card prepared in advance, played at the most sensitive moment for both the Dupree family and the Chelsea brand. Leslie did not step in like a kidnapper skulking in shadow, she entered like an in-day dealmaker, walking into the light in a crisp suit dress, eyes lit with the color of ambition and calculation. She took her place at the entrance to the event control room and called Bill Hamilton in front of Danny, Vernon, and Anita as if closing a property deal. Voice even, cadence slick, each word a tack pinned into a tautboard. "I know where Chelsea is," she said, and with one neat motion the screen in her hand bloomed with the jitter of a wide-angle camera, an iron cot, a flawless white wall, a figure thrashing hard between two slender chains. Danny lurched forward on instinct, while Bill, Fairmont Crest's fixer, needed only a single breath to grasp that the opponent held the one advantage he could not buy back with money: time. Leslie smiled, a soundless smile. Her terms dropped into the room like boulders. Ted Richardson must marry her, an immediate public betrothal to establish a new order. The Residence Council must recognize Leslie's right to reside at Fairmont Crest and issue her access credentials like any member of the upper tier. Vernon and Anita must appear at a formal announcement, acknowledging her before press and neighbors as part of the community. "Not to let me in through the back," Leslie said in a velvet voice with an edge, "but through the front door." The scenario was so deranged it felt like a joke, but the live feed of Chelsea silenced every rebuttal. Ted, the man who once hoisted Leslie and tossed her from the Dupree threshold, stood petrified when his name was flung onto the board, his knuckles blanched around his phone, the gloss of professional civility fishing to expose scalding humiliation and the kind of fear he despised in himself, the fear of not saving the girl at the eye of the storm. Bill tried to wedge in a negotiation, asking for proof that Leslie truly controlled the situation. Leslie answered by turning up the volume on Chelsea's "Please Help Me" and sliding a countdown bar across her screen, a thin line that cut the air in two. "I don't need to touch her to make you obey," Leslie said. "I only need to own the entry points, and tonight every entry point runs through me." At Fairmont Crest, where saving face is oxygen, Leslie's conditions were more than ransom, they were a bid to reset status by a ruthless equation. Trade a safe life for a chair among the elite, trade Vernon and Anita's nod for permanent legitimization, trade Ted's forced smile for a marriage stamp like a red seal on her life's bylaws. "Bring the girl home," Daddy breathed, eyes fixed on Chelsea jerking against the chains. Anita drew her shoulders in, her cold stare cutting at Leslie like a blade. Vernon clenched his jaw until it clicked, small movements Leslie saw and savored, proof that the power she craved could finally be named. Every camera in the hall seemed to turn its back on the product launch and swing toward this mad, symbol-soaked negotiation. Outside, social media had begun to seethe, the collection's hashtag nodding with missing, security doesn't exist, Fairmont Crest is a shiny shell. Bill knew that 15 more minutes of this and everything Chelsea had built over 5-7 years would drop like scaffolding with its pins pulled. He turned to Ted, voice dry as paper. "How much humiliation can you endure to buy 15 minutes? Ted didn't answer. He looked straight at Leslie. "If I agree to announce an engagement, you release her now." Leslie lifted a brow, intrigued like a collector who'd found a rare piece. Engagement is a gesture, she said. Residency is the structure. Recognition is the foundation. I take all three. Then she tilted her head toward Vernon and Anita. And I want to hear it from your own mouths. The air congealed. The rigged lights burned like desert sun. On the other end, Chelsea hiccuped very softly, yet it pulsed as if amplified through every vein in the room. Bill nodded slowly, not in surrender, but to buy a breath for the plan to save his daughter. He wanted to force Leslie into a legal frame, to pry open a path that wasn't abject capitulation, but that ice-cold clock left no room for finer arithmetic. He gave her 4 words, temporary agreement, now. Leslie smiled and set the timetable like sealing a contract, noon tomorrow, Easton Atrium, Fairmont Crest. Engagement video announcement. Residency resolution signed on site. Recognition statement before the media. She jabbed pause on the Chelsea feed, leaving a frozen frame like a slit across everyone's eyes, then snapped the phone shut. Before turning away, Leslie stopped at the threshold and lowered her voice for Bill alone. I didn't kidnap her. But only I know who holds the key to the door that's keeping her. That blurred confession threw another layer of smoke across the field. Was she the architect of the chaos or merely a skilled opportunist? For Fairmont Crest, the answer mattered less than the outcome. By morning, the chair Leslie demanded would be waiting in the hall, and if they failed to put it exactly where she wanted, she would pull the whole building down. As Leslie vanished into the crowd, Bill squeezed Danny's hand. His gaze scored a line across the invisible map of the complex, side gates, cameras, the night shift guard, the names that had to be called in the next 5 minutes. He had to claw back the initiative before that ceremony of humiliation calcified into the new rules of play. And in the nameless room, Chelsea trembled, resting her head against the wall, swallowing her hiccups as if swallowing a thin blade. A small click sounded at the door, hope or a new trap, she couldn't tell. But at Fairmont Crest, where every door opens at a price, she understood, every agreement just spoken out there would write the next lines of her fate in ink that will not fade.